Observational. Watch a crowded room long enough, and you will inevitably spot the person who quietly steps away. They slip out of the conversation, find a secluded corner, or leave the gathering entirely. Society typically labels this behavior as antisocial. We assume that someone choosing to be alone must be suffering from social anxiety, hiding a deep loneliness, or simply unhappy. Biology does offer one explanation for this behavior. For natural introverts, large groups are physically draining. Their nervous systems require quiet environments to restore depleted energy. But there is a distinct difference between biological introversion and an intense, pervasive drive to remain isolated. Introverts seek quiet to recharge so they can return. Others seek quiet because they have learned that staying away is the only way to survive. For many highly capable adults, a strong preference for solitude is actually a psychological shield. It is an adaptation forged in early childhood environments, where the people meant to provide safety failed to do so consistently. When a developing brain repeatedly encounters caregivers who are emotionally unavailable or volatile, it rewires its own expectations. Human connection stops looking like a source of comfort and starts looking like a threat. This leaves us with a difficult tension to resolve. How can a person tell if their hours spent alone are a nourishing period of rest, or an invisible wall constructed years ago to keep the world out? The origins of this behavior trace back to the hallways of childhood. When a home is unpredictable, a child learns to read the tension in the room. Without a consistent baseline of safety, they remain perpetually on guard. A caregiver might offer warmth on Tuesday, but respond with cold distance or anger on Wednesday. This inconsistency teaches the child a cruel lesson. Reaching out for affection is a gamble they are likely to lose. We can see this dynamic in this behavioral diagram illustrating avoidant attachment. The central node tries to link with its orbiters, but as those connections randomly snap, the center learns that attachment carries an unacceptably high emotional risk. To stop the pain of those breaking links, the brain engineers a permanent solution. It solidifies a rigid boundary, cutting off the need for others entirely in order to guarantee its own internal stability. This defense mechanism also forms in quieter households marked by emotional neglect. Here, a child's sadness or frustration is met with a command to calm down, or dismissed entirely as a dramatic overreaction. The child internalizes a specific logic. If expressing a need results in criticism or being ignored, then speaking up is useless. Relying on others only exposes them to further rejection. Withdrawing from social contact is a highly logical strategy under these conditions. It is an architecture of safety, carefully designed by a young mind to prevent disappointment and retain absolute emotional control. Decades later, these early defensive strategies do not disappear. They mature, often disguising themselves as highly praised adult characteristics. The most common manifestation is hyper-independence. This is a rigid reliance on the self, where delegating tasks, asking for advice, or accepting support triggers a deep instinctual alarm. To colleagues and friends, the hyper-independent adult appears entirely capable and responsible. Beneath that competent surface, however, is a profound discomfort with the vulnerability required to let someone else take the wheel. Because they cannot lean on others, close relationships become exhausting. Intimacy requires them to constantly monitor the other person's mood and expectations, turning every interaction into a high-stakes performance. This chart maps the physiological reality of that performance. A nervous system raised in tension remains hypervigilant. As multiple social demands and sensory inputs hit the timeline, the baseline spikes directly into a red danger zone of overstimulation. The body simply cannot sustain that level of output. The moment those external inputs are blocked out, the nervous system instantly drops back down, searching for a calm, regulated rhythm. Seen through this biological lens, alone time takes on a different meaning. It is a medical necessity. Solitude is the ultimate recovery room, providing the only space where they do not have to process emotional noise or calculate what someone else wants. The instinct to retreat is an act of physiological self-preservation. It guarantees one's safe space, free from the requirement to perform, manage, or defend against the outside world. But survival strategies carry a cost. The psychological armor that brilliantly protected a child can eventually become an adult's prison. By relying exclusively on this single defense mechanism, the individual closes off the possibility of genuine support. The safe haven they built slowly devolves into a state of emotional exile. Distinguishing between health and harm requires looking at intent. Healthy solitude is an intentional, conscious choice to step away. It restores energy, brings mental clarity, and leaves the person with a greater capacity to re-engage with the people they care about. This flowchart breaks down the alternative. A healthy choice leads to restoration. Unhealthy isolation happens when withdrawing becomes an automatic default, driven by a fear of being seen. Falling into this loop amplifies anxiety, creating emptiness and compounding internalized shame. Fixing this pattern does not mean throwing away boundaries or forcing a sudden extroversion. The quiet time they require is still entirely valid and biologically necessary. The true objective is building a sense of awareness. It is the ability to pause in the moment and ask, am I stepping away to nourish myself, or am I defaulting to isolation because I am afraid? Because at the end of the day, understanding this adaptation reframes the entire journey. People needing extreme solitude aren't inherently running away from the world. They are simply doing the hard work of learning to live safely with themselves.